What's good, meaningful movers? Welcome back to Moving with Meaning, the podcast, where actions have meaning, words have meaning, and we open up the conversations to discover what's your next move. I'm your host, Krystal. In today's episode, we have a fellow fantasy author on the call. It's amazing the likeness that we find among our affinity to writing, but also the relationship we build into our literary work. But you know how we do it here. We need to set that theme. So let's go ahead and do that. The word of the day is affection. What a warm word, eh? Both in sensation and emotion. Ever wonder if you know you are happy with where you are or what you are doing? I'd like to think we have an internal thermostat. Now, I'm someone that prefers cooler temperatures than the warmer ones, but I know that my body temperature heats up when I feel deeply passionate about something. That goes for both when I am angry, happy, and sad. Perhaps that's an adventure we'll go through a bit today. That's enough of me talking. How about we introduce our guest? And there's no one better to do that than himself, Kristof. Why don't you go ahead and give the people a bit of background about yourself and what you are going to share with us today?
Well, I should probably begin by just explaining, rather, that I have Tourette's. That is going to determine the momentum of my speech sometimes.
No worries.
Shakespeare. So one of the things I say is Shakespeare, and it's just Shakespeare. It's involuntary, and the choice of word is also involuntary. I just happen to get lucky. Sometimes the words are really not so fun. Shakespeare. I'm a Navy veteran, and I won some awards in journalism and photography. I taught myself all of that stuff. Shakespeare. Yeah, and I love my work more than anything, I guess. Shakespeare.
Awesome. I think I'd really like to know when you developed, I suppose, this
affection.
Yes, I really like that. Tell me about that.
Shakespeare. Oh man, there's always been something magical for me about words, because I felt like of all the things in the world other than chaos and its invention, there was no other force that was more potent. Shakespeare. Words described everything about the world. I mean, by their nature, that's what they do. But also, we have a really visceral connection with them. And so, like, everyone knows and understands that words represent everything and nothing all at once, oftentimes. And so that's what makes them so fascinating to me, Shakespeare, as a writer. And as a person, I think, Shakespeare. I was 13 when my teacher said that we needed to write a letter to soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm from South Texas, so that was a thing we did. Shakespeare, which is no harm in that. But I remember it being a very solemn thing. And I think, you know what, part of it might have been motivated by Saving Private Ryan, seeing a corpsman on the beaches of Normandy, like running through the fire and blood and explosions to get to someone in need. And I always thought that was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And I wanted to do that, Shakespeare. Not because I wanted any kind of glory, but because I knew that I was capable. And that in that context, I could do the job. And so then I could make a difference, like a tangible difference. Someone would live when they would have otherwise died. If you've seen the movie, you know that at one point, the general, I think, is played by Tommy Lee Jones. He reads a letter from Abraham Lincoln, or is written by Abraham Lincoln. I don't know if it's a real letter or not. In the same sense, I tried to sort of recreate that profound feeling that I was exposed to watching that movie. And Shakespeare and the writing itself. If you ever read the Gettysburg Address, I think it's something like 87 words, Shakespeare, which is a very modest passage in terms of size, but it is truly something to behold. It is a work of art in itself. It's extraordinary. And if you've ever seen the Lincoln Memorial, it's beautiful. If you haven't, you should go. But I wrote the letter. I remember feeling a kind of awakening, like there was a music I'd never experienced before in my life.
It's poetic.
Yeah, I never loved anything like that before, and I never felt so certain. It just made sense to me. It's hard to explain. It's Shakespeare. When I turned it in, I didn't think anything of it. That was the first period. And then so in the middle of the day, I was swarmed by a bunch of kids, Shakespeare, on the way to lunch. And they said, "We heard your letter. The teacher's been reading it, Shakespeare. She's been reading it to every class." Shakespeare. I remember there's a kid I knew that hated me ever since we were little. we were like the youngest. Ever since we were in elementary school, this kid, he was such a good guy. I don't know if he's a good guy, but he was fine back then. But anyway, he hated me, and even he was like, "Yeah, I mean, it was really good." I was like, "Hold on, wait a minute." Shakespeare. So I gave it some credence. When I approached that teacher about it, she was like, "I can't believe that you wrote that. It was so beautiful, and I want to publish it in the newspaper and all this stuff." So it was the seed that brung unto me my purpose. I didn't write for anymore really after that until I was like 19 and 20 in the Navy.
Okay. And I like how you said capable in the beginning. We're gonna get back to that because I think as we go through this story, I think that is. I mean, that trumps the theme, in my opinion. So let's keep moving. So, you developed Tourette's, or you were born with Tourette's?
Shakespeare. The problem with Tourette's, it's called a syndrome. Shakespeare. For anyone that doesn't know, a syndrome is a pattern of symptoms where the underlying cause is unknown. In that sense, it's hard to say exactly when it manifested. But Shakespeare. I have no idea if I was symptomatic before I joined the Navy, but as far as I know, it started when I was 19 and I was in the military. And Shakespeare, it was episodic after that. Like every couple of years, I would have a day where I would feel really, really strange. Other than that, there really nothing happened. And then when I was 25, it began to generate more reliably every Shakespeare. I was having tics every single day.
Okay. So I know you mentioned something about it got increasingly intense.
Injurious, yeah.
Yes. And so what are some things that you had to do to protect yourself from you?
Oh my goodness. That's a real concern for me. I've injured my thumb so many times that I can't really use it that much anymore. For most things, it's not strong enough. Like, this is my dominant hand too, and it's because I involuntarily punch things and hit things. Fortunately, I moved on from that tic, but unfortunately, it's much worse now. I gouge my own eyes out with my fingers. Shakespeare, and I do that probably a few dozen times a day, and it's pretty miserable.
So in the midst of that, I guess, how did you get around to finding work or just making a living?
Shakespeare. Fortunately, I live in Canada, British Columbia. Shakespeare. Tourette's is recognized as a disability everywhere, but often Shakespeare, for people that don't have the government support that I have, it's a lot. Shakespeare. It's a lot more difficult. So I get everything I need from them. Shakespeare. I don't really have to go outside of it that much. Shakespeare. I do have to a little bit just because it's kind of impossible to like buy anything extra oftentimes. So I have sometimes people help me with that sort of stuff. But Shakespeare, I'm quite fortunate, I think. Unlike my predecessors who often died in gutters and starving, and buried in mass graves, preventable illnesses. I don't. Shakespeare. I've been spared some of that.
Yeah. So in this case, you were, I guess, trouble finding getting work. This is me trying to see how you got back into writing, because you stopped writing for some time, right? And so what happened that kind of said, hey, let me go back into writing?
Oh, Shakespeare. That's right. Shakespeare. I was 32, Shakespeare, and I had contacted the Work BC office, Work British Columbia. They help do resumes. They do all kinds of stuff, Shakespeare, and they help you find work, essentially. And they told me on October 16th, 2021, Shakespeare, they couldn't find any kind of position for me to do. The fact that my symptoms are unreliable in their severity, but not like in their whole, like in their presence in general. Some days I would be bedridden, and other days, like, it's impossible for me to focus because I've hit myself in the face a couple hundred times already that day and punching myself, and it really sucks, actually. Anyways, they told me they couldn't find anything. So the woman on the end of the line, I think her name was Erin, she told me, maybe you should write. You would like to do that. You've won awards and stuff. And I hung up the phone with her after that. And 10 minutes later, I started writing my book.
That is so beautiful on so many levels. Just because for her to have mentioned that, she had to have known your story. She had to have known you. And so she really thought about this. She put some thought into that, and I can't imagine her going, well, why don't you go ahead and write or something? It was, did you have a talent for something? This is where I think maybe your niche should be. So kudos to you, Erin. Shout out, because that was some great advice, right? Because we're finna talk about some fantasy work here. So tell me about this book. You started writing, you picked up, you've never looked back. So this is fantasy. Why did you
Shakespeare.
choose the fantasy genre? Oh, I love it.
Shakespeare. I chose fantasy because the audience is much more readily willing to suspend their disbelief in many factors that
Agree.
are relevant, I think, to what I wanted to talk about. Shakespeare. For example, I used to read a lot of news and stuff like that. I don't anymore. I stopped reading the news a long time ago for my mental health. Even though I was a journalist, Shakespeare, it was miserable for me to know what was going on all the time because I was devising catastrophic scenarios in my head every day. And I think everyone does that. Catastrophizing it becomes a coping mechanism, you know?
Hmm.
And for some people, it's really wounding to their well being. And I'm one of those people. I picked fantasy because I could discuss climate change, I could discuss income inequality, I can discuss slavery, which is even more of a problem somehow. There's more slaves now than there ever have been in the history of the world, which is insane. The other thing was that I wanted to write an adventure for everyone, Shakespeare. And so there's some qualities of the world that I didn't want to include for Shakespeare. For example, there's no overt racism or sexism in the book at all because I felt like people deal with that enough. I feel like it's baggage in a time where you're trying to tell a story. It's just not relevant for me anyway in the work. So whenever anyone reads it, whether they're whoever they are, and their station, their demographic, all of these qualities aren't relevant. It's about anyone can achieve anything. It's similar to Tolkien, but it has more modern sentiments. Because I think there are not enough people that present as women in the Lord of the Rings series that really inspire. I feel like it's an important thing to me. I think, and also people with disabilities. And some of the nuance of their suffering, which is often overlooked and not explored, which is a lot more Shakespeare. It's a lot more interesting than people realize.
Yeah. You know what I like? When you were talking about that, I remember asking, I was like, do you write from a female perspective? You were like, yeah, and I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, I'm getting this book. I think it's awesome for females to delve into the world of, masculine. And then I think it's also great
Hmm.
for males to delve into the feminine world.
There's actually so many components to my work first of all, I don't use gendered language to describe like military troops, for example. Everyone is soldiers or troops. They're not like, these are my men, and my men are going to die here on this hill. I don't do
Yeah.
that. I don't like that because it excludes, like, you know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? It's missing. The other thing which was important to me was one quality of the world that I think is really frustrating and creates a lot of contention is the fact that older women understand the value of young men, but young men do not reciprocate that respect and understanding. Shakespeare, that's another quality that needed to be explored. So I try to demonstrate healthy relationships between really extraordinary older women, in their 60s, approaching 70 years old, and like in positions of leadership where their gender is not really relevant. And again, like it isn't almost every time, but it is. It's really an interesting line to
Yeah.
toe, but it's an important one to keep in mind so that you fairly represent like what would happen, realistically.
I like that. I like it. It's so multifaceted. It's so generic in a way that makes it so unique. I guess it's interesting, right? It's like I was like, you're right, because I think when I was writing my books, I was doing kind of the same thing. I caught myself writing men or women, and then I would go back when I was editing, and I was like, no, 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 I'm referring to as what they are, not by their gender. So I think that was something that I wanted to do, but I had to it was almost like an indoctrination that I was breaking.
Oh, okay. I use plenty of pronouns, but like not when describing stuff that's like in a group setting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah, yeah.
sorry. Yeah,
That's what I mean. That's exactly what I
Shakespeare. No,
mean.
yeah.
Yep,
Okay.
yep, yep, yep.
Yeah.
'Cause that's what I was doing. Because
Hmm.
I have like warriors, but when I was referring to them, I would say, "Oh, my men," and I was like, I would have to go back, and I would always go
Yeah.
back, and I would edit my book so many times because I was like, when I was referring to these people, I wanted to make sure I refer to them as the group of people that they are, not by the pronouns. So it was definitely a curve for me to get
No
to
funny.
get over. So
Yeah, we don't even realize that we do that. We're victims of that. We don't even realize it. Shakespeare, Shakespeare.
yep, yep.
But yeah.
I think you have some exciting news about your promotion, your presentation. You're getting on a stage or something. What's going on? Tell me what's going on.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, Shakespeare. 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 I've done 30 something interviews in the last couple months. Shakespeare. It's been really wonderful getting to meet all these people, and it's been getting messages from people that want to read my book or have read my work. Recently, a woman named Diane, Lena, she has a show called My Best Fail, and she contacted me, and she has a studio and cameras and all this stuff. Then she said that she wanted me to come to her studio, Shakespeare, and film an episode with her, an interview. She's like helping me. She's paying for my travel expenses and a hotel stay. That's never happened before. And anything. I've never had anything remotely like this. Especially something that is born from my invention, right?
Yeah.
And my experiences alone, right? It's unique in that sense. And it was really validating. Every interview has been Shakespeare is really validating, but it's funny how things work in degrees, right? Shakespeare.
Yes. Yes.
Shakespeare.
I'm so happy for you because after we chat, I Googled your book, and I'm not going to lie, it came right up with your name. So I'm like, okay, he's legit. Like, he's out there, dude. You help with teaching writing and things like that, right?
It's so fun. Oh man, I don't know how much of a coincidence it is that all my students are women. You know what's funny? It didn't occur to me it has anything to do with my face. I thought it had everything to do with the fact that guys are a lot more prideful, and like they're not willing to concede, like they don't know. So my first thought was, I have all these women as students because they're the ones willing to like actually go, I don't know everything about this, and that accepting help is some kind of concession in some way, because of course it's not Shakespeare. And they're really very lovely people. It's really incredible getting to teach, because I taught myself Shakespeare. I have a high school diploma. I've done like maybe 2 years of community college, and then I did 1 semester at an actual university. Shakespeare. I'm entirely self-taught. And so like the fact that some of my students are English teachers is something to celebrate for me anyway. Because they listen to me. It's not an argument. I worked for like 3 hours with them, and I can explain my rationale. I've had to develop this on my own, but the instincts are there, and I love it. And I've never had one go less than 3 hours. I think I've said that. It's a lot of fun. Shakespeare. I do it for free.
Yeah.
We go word for word. It's very deliberate, very careful deconstruction. Shakespeare.
Okay. Is this virtual, or do they have to sign up to reach out to you for your services?
Yeah, they just email Shakespeare. They just email or message me on any social media platform, and I'll get it. You just have to schedule an appointment. That's it. You don't have to pay for it or anything. It's free.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah, and Shakespeare, we discuss everything.
Well, let me tell you what. If you can have a conversation with English majors and not get any kind of back and forth,
yeah, it's no resistance.
Yes, that's you're accomplished. That's a win by itself. Okay, and then you're just stacking on top of that.
Is it harder to do?
Yeah. For me, it is. Well, I guess. Because for certain English majors, they're either more grammatical, driven, right? There's that, and then there's others that kind of have their own story. So I'll just give you this little tidbit about my experience with my editor.
Yeah.
I had my story, and she was so enthralled in the book where she wanted the story to go a certain way. And she was like, I think it would be driven way more, blah, 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 this way if it was this way. I'm like, but that doesn't fit anything in the plot or in the premise. Why are we doing that? And so there was a point where it was because they're so opinionated. Right, and they think that they're right all the time. That's a
virtue in that profession.
Yes. So we got a good one here, folks. Anyhow, so Krystal, are you ready to give us your golden nuggets and add that ketchup just to recap?
I think that everything in life seems to me now. My understanding is that it exists on a spectrum, and so whenever you experience extremes of one thing or another thing, like in a negative sense, just remember that there's so many variables that can inspire a bad day, and like emotionally. And so it's important to remember to be able to calibrate forgiveness of yourself and your perception of the world.
I believe that. Thank you so much, Kristof. That was a great ending nugget. Well, that's the episode today. What challenges have you been presented with? Have you started down a path of passion and felt it necessary to find another one because it just fits the norm? Or maybe the inverse. You found your way back to your passion from an unlikely source. Whatever the case, I say you look at what is natural versus that of normal. That's why I appreciate Kristof sharing his adventure through trial and triumph. We don't get too many choices in life, so it's important that we choose when the opportunity comes. They are rare, these second chances. Make sure you drop a search and pick up another fantasy rarity, The Second Son, Volumes 1 and 2. How about you? I want to hear your stories of adventure into your passion. Maybe a second chance or a casual suggestion. I love it all, and so will someone else. Before I let you go, Kristof, why don't you go ahead and remind the people who you are, where they can find your resources, or reach out to you?
Shakespeare. Kristof Morrow. My book is called The Second Son. I also have a kid's book called Liam Earns a Friend. You can find me on TikTok and Instagram and the other ones too, but I really use those two predominantly.
Awesome. I'll make sure to include all of Kristof's resources and connections in the episode description, as well as on my website's resources page, movingwithmeaning.com. Make sure you guys subscribe to the show, Moving with Meaning, the podcast, and tap that alert bell so you know when these episodes drop. I am on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and now YouTube Music. Please share, like, repost, and follow. Tag someone. We are creating a community here. Quick housekeeping before you go. Follow me on Instagram at movingwithmeaning82. Also connect with me on LinkedIn. I do dabble in TikTok at Krystal B. Clark. My YouTube channel is up. Kindly run over there and have a look or two. Links are in the episode. Alrighty. I'm Krystal on Moving with Meaning, the podcast, reminding you to take it one step at a time. All moves have meaning. Check y'all later.